Of course, I'm Tyler. I think a lot about JavaScript and React and startups and creating developer content. So that's what we're here to mostly talk about, along with a few other things. So
I was muted myself, but now people can hear me. Happy I had you intro you rather than
of
doing it
course,
myself.
I got it. No worries.
How are we doing levels wise, guys? Everything sound okay?
Hello, hello, hello.
Testing 1, 2, 3. All good. Slightly bassy. That's probably going to be the case with my newer setup. I might want to turn it down later, but yeah,
It's
later.
kind of where you want to be. Is a little bit that like baritone-y, that the like late night radio hosts getting some vibes going. Like,
Not all of us just have the natural radio voice, man. That's like, might come to you, but that's not for everyone here.
it's funny. So when I started, I was like worried that my voice, because it's pretty nasally if I'm not like focused. Like my wife calls this like my teaching voice, because when I'm like just like naturally talking, it's like kind of like I kind of mumble, and my mom gets super tripped out by it because she knows my like real voice the best, right? And so yeah, I've had to perfect my talking into a microphone voice, but luckily it comes pretty naturally now. So
Yeah, that's hilarious because I haven't practiced at all. I think I more care too much as an audio engineer. I'm just super insecure about how all of the audio sounds. And
right.
the big thing for me was turning on self-monitor. It's the most evil thing in the world and it drives you mad, but
Right.
it just makes you a better speaker.
Totally. Anton, the first time joining. Welcome.
Welcome. Great to have you here, man. Awesome to have so many of y'all here already. I know it's a bit early still, but good to have y'all already. But yeah. I want to give a quick spiel about Tyler because I know I'm a huge fan of everybody I bring on the show, but this is the man who's been raising the bar for like the quality of content on YouTube, especially in like JavaScript world for a minute now. If y'all haven't seen his like or YX1, the story of videos, they're some of the like most important JavaScript content on the internet. And I'm really excited for like 10 years from now when these are the things we're referencing instead of obscure 2-hour talks you have to sit through to get one good nugget.
Thank you. That was big praise. That's really the goal. Is I feel like and we've kind of experienced this, right? When you're in an industry for so long, you start to have like pattern recognition with like historical context, and it's super important and it's super valuable. But then you get to the point where it's like, okay, well, no one is really telling these stories. No one is really like, saying, how did we get here? And so that was really our goal with with all the videos we've been doing, is just allowing people who weren't there to really understand, like, hey, we didn't just get here out of nowhere. Like there's a fairly rational and logical path to how we got here. And yeah, it's worked out fairly well so far. So glad you're enjoying it. So
funny enough, I actually had a friend ask a few days ago, hey, I feel like I found all this awesome content about how like React happened, how Next happened, all the things we're talking about and using now happened. I want more context of this quality. How do I find like the history of PHP and LAMP and like the things before this? And I just like smiled and apologized. Like it doesn't exist. Those things weren't well documented.
And that's what's going to be hard for us, especially as the channel grows, because up until this point, it's been just like me telling, my lived experience. But it's going to get to the point where it's like, yeah, I wasn't there in the early days doing that kind of stuff. And so relying on, I don't really know how it'll go yet, but we'll see. Hopefully, like if we can figure that out, right? If we can start telling stories, and that's our plan of things we didn't directly live, I think that'll get really interesting, because then like sky's the limit. So
yeah, absolutely. It's hard telling stories and like giving this, I'm trying to remember how to put this. It's been an interesting experience from both as like a creator that does a lot of interviews and such, as well as a like person who runs a company. You set a really high bar in the things that you're best at and care the most about. And part of that ends up being, as you succeed, that you end up doing more things that you're worse at, and you have to lower your bar to get more successful. And if you want to like expand your content, you have to expand it into things you're less confident in and will be more wrong on and put out lower quality to an extent. I'm curious how you've like encountered that throughout your career where like as you grow, you have to lower your bar even though your quality goes up?
Yeah, you're totally right. I got lucky in like when I started doing developer content, it was like what 2015, maybe 2014, and the bar was much lower back then, right? Like usually the people I point to be like the bar of content now, like Josh Camo is always the one who stands out, right? All his stuff's brilliant, he's brilliant, execution's brilliant. In 2015, there was none of that. It was just like people writing blogs and people were mostly happy. Sometimes like if the docs weren't bad, you'd find a good tutorial. So I got lucky in like my figure it out phase was kind of the phase where everybody was figuring it out, right? I don't know how, especially people like Josh, like jump into it nowadays because the bar really is a lot higher, and that could be super intimidating for a lot of beginners. But I think like that's fine, understanding obviously, and this is corny, but like that you'll get better the more that you do the thing. Will work out. A lot of love in the chat. Appreciate you all. Thank you. Thank you for the support.
Yeah,
So.
you'll be getting that the whole show. I'm sure everyone here is a big fan. Yeah, I shout out to like New Boston back in the OG YouTube days. That's how I learned Java to host my Minecraft server. It's crazy how much things have improved.
Right. One of my favorite days as a developer was he like followed me on Twitter randomly a few years ago. And I was like, this is such a strange experience. Cause I did the same thing you did, right? Where it's like, I got to learn like Java for this like college class. My professor's garbage. So where do you go to? You find this random dude in Boston, Bucky, right? Super funny,
Bucky.
super enjoyable, teaches you everything. And he's brilliant and great. And like, I hope he's still doing well. But yeah, it's been such an interesting thing. But even like compare like his early videos to again, Josh is kind of the standard, but something like a Josh would do, or like we would do, right? Like the bar is just so much higher now. And if you want to stand out, you really have to like put in the time to make it different, right? Rather than just like Bucky showing up and be like, hey guys, like, and then he has a bunch of poop jokes and like it's funny and you go on with your life. Like nowadays it's a completely different ecosystem. But
yeah. And on top of that, there's this new idea of like documentary content to an extent where it's much less about the teaching somebody how to use something they're already using, much more like historical. How likely is it that we're going to go rewatch a tutorial from the New Boston 10 years ago on a version of Java nobody shipped for the last 8? Like that's not valuable. Whereas I will definitely be watching the videos on your channel for the next few years.
Right. And that's refreshing because like I feel like so often, especially when it comes to like React and like all the React stuff we've done, React Router, another great example. Don't know if the React Router boys are watching. I've taught more React Router than anyone in the entire world, including them, because I've made courses every iteration. And so I've made like 4 React Router courses and it kills me every time. But that's kind of the nature of creating content around something like React or React Router that isn't so timeless. And so that's why we've absolutely loved, again, going back to the YouTube channel, this new stuff, because it does feel like we can have impact for people a decade from now rather than just like until the next React Router version comes out in 6 months, So it's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely. This is also like, shout out, not a lot of people here are going to expect. Rich Harris's talks are some of the best talks in the industry and are another great example of like historically considerate and meaningful well outside of the thing that they like announce or are focused around. Like I regularly go back to like the Svelte 3 announcement to hear him explain the history of how we got to where we are. And it's so important, like as you yourself grow and see how these things change, to understand enough history to get why they're changing and not feel like everything's falling out from underneath you in a way.
Right. And even from like a learning perspective, that's super valuable too, right? Because like imagine having to learn how to drive a car without ever knowing like what a car is or like seeing one. Like that's kind of what we do with new beginners is like, okay, you're learning Java or whatever in college, like we're going to build some like terminal game. And everyone's like, what's a terminal? Right. And you're just kind of like floating around in this like dead space. And yeah, it's just completely absurd. And this is going more into like an education side of things, but like the fact that we expect people to learn these things without the context. And also like documentation historically doesn't really care to provide that context because they're usually stuck with like trying to provide like an API reference, which is valuable most of the time. But when you're just getting started, like it's, and I feel like that's why specifically content creators are good. And I know they kind of get a lot of crap, especially from, you know, like some specific core teams that I know, but like, how many of us would have learned React back in the day if it wasn't for like, you know, some egghead stuff or like, you know, the OG West Boss stuff or even like AngularJS, right? With John Lindquist, like back in the day, like, it's getting better because people are starting to like DevRel is a thing now and people are focusing on documentation as like a big part of the thing. But in the early days, it wasn't like that. So I don't know. Yeah. Traversy, another great example, right? Where all of us learned web dev from Traversy back in the day or Bucky before that, right? So
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely seeing the shift as well. Like I had a great convo with Rachel Lee last week. They're one of the lead maintainers on the React core docs. They personally do not like and have been very surprised by how video content has been evolving and taking more of like the interest share over time. Like when they did like user reviews and found so many new developers looking to video content, that was a huge surprise to them. And it's absolutely the trend. There's a lot of reasons for it, but I think for me, the biggest one is when you don't have others around you, like the peers who are doing the thing, there are so many little pieces that you don't pick up, like the hotkeys to do things in your editor or how much time you should be spending like moving your files around or just the general sense of how people do this. Like I could sit there and describe to you in every little detail how to build something from scratch on a piece of paper, but you don't know what it looks like to do that still.
Right. And that's what I remember way back in the day, probably 2018, maybe 2019. Maybe not that far back, but yeah, I had a chat with Rachel because she was like experimenting or like they were going down this path of like, hey, we're going to recreate the React docs. And the big focus of the conversation was like this idea of, hey, everyone treats docs like they're like this like very boring static thing. And I think that's why courses have an advantage because we don't have essentially like the handcuffs of being an API reference. We can kind of do whatever we want. We could have videos, we could have quizzes, we could have all that stuff. And so to watch her then take that idea and just the brilliant execution of it with the new React docs has just been super fun to watch. And she really set the bar, and that team really set the bar for new documentation because the new React docs are amazing. And it really is fun to see again, like, hey, what if we just like rethought what documentation was? And started from like a first principles approach of what we're trying to solve rather than just like, you know, use like whatever the comments in our repo to like generate dynamic docs. You know, it's like, it's been really interesting to watch and big shout out to her. So
yeah, Rachel's the best. Big shout out to them. Make sure you watch that episode last week if you haven't already. They are a phenomenal developer, DevRel, and deep developer educator more than anything. Like, it's really cool talking to somebody who's that senior specifically in developer education as their like one and only focus. It was an awesome conversation. I was really pumped that we got to have that one. Yeah. On that topic though, I'm really curious. You touched on this idea of like education materials, reference materials, and like examples almost all being like kind of different and serving different roles. I'm curious how you feel about where we as creators fit in the space. Like, should we be hopping into docs for like the projects that we use on stream? Should we be making like, what should those relationships look like between us and the like or the creators of the documentation and the materials that we use?
This is a hard one for me because, and I've gotten this a lot just because I've been involved with React over, you know, since whatever, 2014. And I've always been of the opinion, and this could be wrong, that I can do more on my own trying to like evangelize React and teach React than I could if I were like collaborating with the React team. Not because collaboration is bad, just because me without like it would just add another like I don't necessarily need PRs for my content, right? Like I don't need someone and this is all obviously has caveats where like this is kind of what we do at ui.dev, but like it's really hard to collaborate with very smart people because very smart people by definition have very strong opinions usually. And so like and maybe I don't know if you got into this with Rachel, but like maybe that's why the React docs took years, because they wanted it to be perfect, and you have a bunch of really smart people kind of debating really hard things, and you do get a really good product from that. But like from my perspective, it's always been like, hey, I'm just going to go and create content by myself and not really worry about what other people think if I'm doing it in the best way that I think is possible. And that's probably controversial, but it's worked out so far because like, I mean, that's kind of the vibe of the internet, right? It's like, it's permissionless. You can kind of do what you want. If I was like, you know, writing docs for the React or writing stuff for the React docs, like I'd be a lot slower. But I think like the way I always look at it is like embrace the, you know, chaos of the internet and just like create the thing you want to exist. And there's no one stopping you. And that's a benefit, right? That's not a bug. And I don't know. That's how I've always looked at it. Not saying again, collaboration isn't bad, but like, I don't necessarily care what the React team thinks of my content. I don't care what the Vercel team thinks of our Next.js video. Like I'm gonna create it regardless. If something is wrong, that's a problem. But luckily so far, I don't think we've like put out wrong information. And I know from their perspective, like it's hard for them because they have to essentially try to police everybody, because if something does get put out and it's wrong, as we've seen a billion times with like use effect, for example, how many wrong use effect tutorials have you seen? Right? Oh, like man. A billion. And I get their frustration with someone with that perspective, but again, it's like, I'm just going to publish my stuff and hope for the best. And that's kind of what I've always done. So
I dig that attitude a lot. I definitely have almost like, now I think about it to a fault, pushed to make sure my content was respected and appreciated by the people whose like things it was using.
Screw that. That's my vibe. Screw that. Cause it's like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, because what happens is like, you get put in this weird, and I'm so passionate about this because I kind of let it paralyze me for a few years, right? Like if you look, I'm publishing a lot of content up until 2020-ish, stop for a little bit, and then January of 2022, I'm pushing out content. And part of that was because like got into a few of these things where it was like, oh, maybe like this person is going to think this of this video and whatnot. And it's like, I just don't think that's it's a really hard place to be as a creator when you have these like artificial bosses, right? Like I can publish what I want. I don't need permission to do anything, right? People at my company can publish what they want, right? And yes, there's a part of being respectful and again making sure you're right in like not putting out bad like wrong content, because that's all they care about, right? The React team doesn't want you to put out wrong content because then it just makes life harder for them, because then they have to correct it. But if they don't like the content you're putting out, but it's right, like that's on them to figure out, because like that's the vibe. That's the internet, right? So there's a bunch of Slack things going off in my ear, and I know it's my team saying like, yeah, preach, you're right.
I love that attitude so much. I will say I'm unique in the sense that since I'm not doing this as my job, and it's okay if I like piss people off, I'm not afraid to call out Vercel when I'm live and running into problems. I do it all the time. I tried showing off React 18 in the new like Next Canary. I could not get it to run no matter what I did when I was live. And they were like, oh yeah, you just happened to hit this when there was a version desync. I was like, yeah, I was showing off your tech live. I NPM installed the template you had on your GitHub and it didn't work. Like, I'm sorry the content wasn't the smiley Theo I usually am when I talk about Vercel, but you shipped something broken, and when I tried to show it off, it was broken. It's a little different in live, I will admit, in the sense that like I can't make the decision after the fact. I have to make the decision when I'm going, and that means that I can choose to disengage, or I can say what just happened and why it was a problem. And so far, people have been pretty cool with that. Been really pissy about type safety lately. I'm tired of everybody treating it like a third class thing that isn't necessary. Like, yeah, the backend code's right there. Why don't I have my types?
Yep. I love it. Love the hot takes. But yeah, I think I don't know. I think embrace the permissionlessness of the medium, right? That's what I've had to convince myself a few years of doing, and since doing that, it's been a lot better. So, my shirt is from shop.ui.dev. We don't even promote that at all. We've had like almost no sales because we never talk about it, but that's where it's from. So,
Realize we don't have a ping command. Good call, Howdy. I'll add that later. But yeah, I think with the stress of content creation is something that we don't talk about enough. I know I personally am really lucky in the sense that like this isn't my job. This isn't even like the strongest funnel for my job. I am testing a custom build of OBS, and it works really good for like an hour, it turns out. So, oops. Hopefully that won't crash again. I turned off a bunch of the things that were broken, and hopefully, fingers crossed, it won't break again. I also have none of my monitoring for anything open anymore. I have one chat window, so somebody in chat let me know if stuff's broken at any point. Fingers crossed we're good now.
We're doing it live.
That we are. Sorry again. Anyways, stresses of content creation. I just lost half the viewers for the stream, and they're probably not going to come back. So if y'all wondered what that feels like, now you have a good idea of what it looks like, at least. Thankfully, I'm not a full-time content creator, because that could have killed my income for this week.
We'll throw down some more hot takes. We'll get them back.
Yeah, they'll appear.
Virals.
And hopefully the VOD will do okay. Let me get my Notion back open at least. Anyways, yeah, I'd love to hear more from your perspective. Like, first off, were you ever a full-time developer proper, like working on like developing code for a living? And what was it like moving from that to content? Like, how did your goals and expectations change?
Yeah, so back in, I don't know when that was, 2012, 2013 was when I was like writing content or writing like obviously software full-time. Then I switched because I took a job as well. First, I was like teaching part-time at a place called Dev Mountain, which is like a boot camp here in Utah. Really enjoyed it. And I was like, wow, I really enjoy this like teaching, software thing. And so from there, took a full-time role with them. Long story short, kind of spun that into doing some stuff with Egghead. And then from there, it was like, well, this is cool. I wonder if I could kind of just do this full time. And that's what I did. And so I've been doing it pretty much full time since like 2015, 2016. Worked before this for shortly at like a little app. It was actually like one of the very first React Native apps, which was like a little community for people who had cancer that failed because they couldn't raise money. But yeah, now doing this full time. So
I had no idea you were an early React Native developer. That's quite the journey.
It was probably too early. Like if you think React Native is rough now, like the edges of it, we were shipping production React Native when it was like whatever 0.4 or something. Like it was, I think the React Native was announced and we were like shipping stuff like a few months later. Not a great idea, but it was fun at the time. So
I take there's always been React Native wasn't really usable till Unimodules, which I think was 0.68. So like
right. Expo, it was like also pre-Expo. And they came around and did a lot of stuff to make it like better and just like more user friendly. But before that, it was just like Wild West, to be honest. We made it work, but it could have probably gone with something else and been better, but it's fine.
I was on Yamon's show 2 weeks ago doing the React Native Live talk about all the infinite red chaos back in the old Ignite days, which was super fun.
You're getting a lot of video quality stuff, so great job, Ping.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's also his camera, to be fair. He has a nice setup. What's cool about Ping is we no longer are limited on like anything other than the quality of your setup. So if you have a nice camera, then you come through crisp.
It's amazing. I mean, so I don't know if you want to get into this, but I'm super interested in it. Like why did no one do this before Ping?
I don't think
Maybe
there's been.
maybe that's a dumb question.
No, it is not. It is, but it isn't. This is something I needed for my content, my shows, and a lot of the creators I'm friends with and watch. It was very clear that Zoom was built for something. It was built for a lot of things, and content wasn't one of them. It was way too hard for me to combine the tool I was already using, which was OBS, with other video software. They just didn't mesh. They were built in different worlds, and I didn't want to screen capture and hope for the best to bring a guest onto my show. I wanted to copy paste you from my call into like the conversation we're having inside of my software. And that it was so obvious once I had it set up pretty quick. Like, oh yeah, the lighting difference is huge immediately.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, way better. Yeah. Like
I have live
so.
lights. I just didn't have them on, so there we go.
Yeah, that's hilariously different. But yeah, it's a combination of the deep understanding of the problem, video being hard, and not having the biggest market, and it still isn't. Like, to be frank, there are not a lot of people who need Zoom and the ability to use it with OBS and high quality. But as more and more people are buying high-end cameras, more and more people are trying to put together content, I feel like the tools are focused on a lowest common denominator that isn't going to succeed. I see a whole bunch of Wixes, and I don't see a lot of Vercels in the space. We really want to be the first Vercel. We're not trying to tell you, here's how you build a website. We're here to, once you realize the site builders aren't what you need, and you kind of need to roll your own thing, you need to use tools like OBS, but they don't have the ability to bring a guest in. They don't have the ability to remote manage the software. They don't have good audio solutions. We want to solve as many of those problems as possible to build into the platform rather than build a new platform. Imagine if Wix came out with their own operating system before they deployed their first thing. That's how these other companies feel, and we really want to go the other way.
What's been the biggest surprise so far since you've been in startup land?
It's been one of the bets we made has went way better than I ever imagined. The bet was creators need, if we build the right primitives, rather than imagining use cases for the creators, they will come up with shit we never would have imagined. Like, it was so easy to bet on the one or two problems I had and trying to solve those well. But there was a fundamental difference when we shared the parts. We stripped away a few of the unnecessary buttons and really just gave you the core of an embed. You can take a person and put them somewhere else. And somebody recreated Star Trek with it. Somebody started composing anime live with it. Somebody used it to do like a tic-tac-toe game show with 12 people live on Twitch. We just let our tech, or we just helped at a conference over the weekend where our tech was used for a virtual avatar to give a live concert in like full stereo audio quality, live in a concert hall, calling in remote on the screen. And we never imagined any of this when we built Ping. We just wanted to make it easy to get guests into your content, and now people are inventing new types of content with it.
Right, it's like that Guillermo tweet. It was like 2017, where he talked about React is so, I forget the word he used, important that we'll spend the rest of the decade, figuring out its limits. Feels like a similar philosophy with Ping, right? Where it's like, yeah, if you build the right primitives, you don't really know what that means, but if they are the right primitives, then all these things will be built on top of it. So that's awesome.
And if they're wrong, we can refine them and make new primitives and figure that out. But you don't figure out what the right primitives are by building the entire internet. You figure out what the right primitives are by building other primitives that aren't right.
Right. Totally. I dig it.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. Like, I'm actually curious what your thoughts are on this. I don't know how much I've shared this live or on like my show, but we have a really different philosophy around the content creation pipe. We think a lot about the blockers as you create content. Back in the days when I used to do a YouTube video, I'd look right in my camera, I'd talk a whole bunch, record onto the SD card, put that in my computer, transcode it, throw it in my editor, realize that the camera was out of focus. Unplug it, plug it back in, re-record the whole thing, and here we are. Like, it's just finally get it in my editor the way I want, realize, oh, I should have been over slightly to the left for this shot. I'll go reshoot that one. And I end up in this infinite loop of dead stops in my creator flow because, and this is my core belief, because those things were stops. There are so many points in the process where you have to stop and move a thing or do a thing or process a thing. What if the pipe was as live as possible? Even if you're not going live to a viewer, maybe you're going live to your hard drive, or you're going live to your producer who is making micro changes and talking into your ear to make sure that you're doing the small things and plugging the thing you need to. The live isn't a way to output video. It's a way to think about your production pipe. And the more live your pipe can be, the better. Because it's always live somewhere. Like when I'm looking at my camera and talking, it's live until it hits that SD card, then it's dead. We think that live video production pipelines are going to make creators more efficient and more capable of high quality without high churn, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love it. Without kind of knowing, is like, we talked a little bit before we started the video about, before we started the stream, about just like the content creation process. And I think what I did maybe subconsciously is like get rid of all of the things that were annoying about content creation, specifically video, right? Like there was a time where I did like the headshot in the video, but like the problem is that at the time created like so much friction that now it's like, it's basically just me recording audio, then throwing in like visuals on top of it. And so it was like, it's funny that like the pain point you're solving was so true to me that I adjusted how I did content to avoid all the pain points that you mentioned. Luckily it worked out, but like I think it's totally true.
We've seen a lot of that, like creators who I looked up to. So one of my favorite audiophiles, DMS, shout out him. He's been like one of my favorite creators forever. Similar to you, he went to a space that didn't really have a high bar for quality of video and production and leveled it up super hard just out of sheer like willpower. And the content of his video, or the quality of his videos was incredible. I reached out to him just because we're in a similar space. I love my audio shit, of course. And I just wanted to like see what he would think of our product. I know he didn't do much like collaborative content. He's one of our biggest fans, like genuinely fell in love with what we're doing because of our mindset and the way we think about solving these problems. He wasn't doing collaborative content because the tools didn't reach his aspirations there. So he was avoiding the content type because it wasn't hitting his quality bar. And it was really cool learning that and seeing how he's been able to change his content since because the tools now meet his needs.
I totally believe that. I also think the best content creators are the ones who like try to almost like not abstract the tools away, but like they're focused on like the output of the thing rather than like the tools to get there. And so it's funny to hear you talk about that, and specifically that story, because like content creators don't, in my opinion, don't necessarily want to worry, or they shouldn't have to worry about the tools. They should, because creating the content itself is so draining and it's so like hard. And like, I have a very like war is art, or art is war kind of vibe. And, so that's kind of how I approach it, is like, if I have to think about the tools I'm using to create the thing, I've already kind of lost, because the thing itself is going to drain me so much that if I also have to think about the tools to do the thing, then I'm just like, it's a losing battle. So yeah, any thesis about making that easier for creators I think is a good one. So
yeah, absolutely. There's another side to this, and I'm curious about, is like, I'm really curious what no code and content is going to look like when done right. Like for a long time, we've seen all these no code solutions that were kind of trash. And then right. I think the two things that changed that were Figma and Webflow, where they blended the difference between the code and the design experience to a point where I, as a developer, could clean up the rough edges to an extent. And I think we're going to start seeing the same thing in content, where we see tools that aren't necessarily let the person who's ever made a video before make their first video, so much as I have a fancy setup. I could maybe run, and this actually happened 2 weeks ago when Yamon was having problems with his computer trying to stream. I used my setup to run his stream. I just took his stream's key, had him call in through ping, and let him run his show on my computer effectively.
Interesting. Yeah, I think what's going to be. Have you seen? I don't want to call it out because I don't love it, and I don't like, pooping on people who are creating stuff because it's already hard enough. There's a new. It's like a tool for DevRels about like creating developer content, like video, and focused on video. It seems very much like almost like a WYSIWYG for, not even a WYSIWYG, almost like Wix, because we've been using that example for DevRel like content creators to make like video essentially. And I think the hard part from like, cause I looked at it hoping we could use it, but the hard part is like, it almost feels like Bootstrap, what Bootstrap did for CSS. It feels like it's kind of doing that for like developer education videos, and that's fine if you're DevRel and like you don't really care about like how the video makes you feel as much as like the content you're talking about. But to me, what's going to be interesting is when we start getting video tools that like allow you to embrace your, like, for lack of a better word, like your vibe, right? Like if you go watch our recent YouTube videos, like all of them have a vibe to them. And I don't exactly know what it looks like, but like you have to be able to allow creators to capture that, and make it easier to do like that thing rather than just like this like template that they just like throw videos into, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I love the Bootstrap example, and I think that I'm going to dig into that because I think this is why I like Tailwind so much. Is I heard one person on HN say like, wow, I can immediately tell when a site's Tailwind. And I checked, and the site barely looked Tailwind except for it had a blog post on it that was using Tailwind typography. Yeah, you can recognize that one opinionated part, but not the rest.
Yeah, Chris Coyer, I think, sent out that exact tweet, and I it was the one thing I love Chris, and I agree with him all the time. I disagreed with him there because like, it gives you a nice abstraction over CSS without like with almost like the freedom of like creativity. I like that example.
Absolutely. It feels like CSS in Zen mode for me rather than like CSS that's opinionated without the CSS, which is what Bootstrap was. I'm not writing CSS anymore. I'm writing Bootstrap. With Tailwind, I'm still thinking in CSS. I know the exact CSS everything I write compiles to. I can write it faster. And that's the type of thing we want to do. How can we make you faster, better, more effective as a creator that knows what they want, rather than guiding you to where you want to be or where you think you want to be that we're actually telling you. It's the whole like guardrails versus safety nets thing that I love to talk about. Like everyone's building guardrails. That's like that's the 100% unit test code coverage code base. That's a bunch of guardrails. And it takes so long to build and deploy that if something does go wrong, you have to wait 2 hours to fix it. You have no safety net anymore. You just have the guardrails. I don't care about guardrails. People can fall over all they want as long as there's a good place to land.
Right. And I think by having that philosophy, you're going to enable, almost by definition, much more powerful things to be built on top. And that's kind of how I think about it too, is like every one of these, like, oh, make your process easier for like making YouTube videos that I look at is always like, well, I can't really use this thing because like, not because it's not fine, but it's just like does a little bit too much and doesn't kind of give me enough, I don't know, ability to express myself is a lame way to put it, but that's kind of true. Yeah. Remotion's an interesting one. Anton, sorry to
no worries. I love Remotion.
Just how you mentioned that. Yeah, that's what I don't use it. Alex Anderson on our team has been experimenting with it. The idea, if you're not familiar, is that basically it allows you to like make videos with React, which is a really interesting idea because again, it goes back to like, okay, if React is such a good idea, like we should be exploring like, where are the edges of this like component based, almost like creation tool. So I haven't used Remotion much. And the reason for that, ironically, is like, I kind of found what works for me, and it may not be the best process, but again, like I don't like to think about my tools. I like to think about the output of the thing I'm creating. And so eventually, whenever I like take a break from the YouTube grind, I will definitely dive into Remotion and check it out. But because like my initial, like, because I've built a few videos without Remotion, and they worked fine, it's like, I'm just going to like, focus on the
Right until the
creation
wheels
process.
fall off.
Exactly. And so far so good. So
I have to ask, are you a Final Cut guy, a DaVinci guy, or one of those guys?
No. That's the thing. It's like, you'll laugh when you hear my process. Like, ScreenFlow, right? The simplest, basic, like, video editor thing that there is. I used it because that's what Egghead recommended back in the day, and it's been fine, and like it works for me. And then from there, it's like I kind of just use a bunch of stuff. Like Framer Motion is great for some animation stuff. Like built-in ScreenFlow animations. Like the tool isn't the interesting thing for me. And I've repeated myself, and I get that I keep repeating myself, but like it's very much true. And I know that's hard for you too, because like that's your entire world, is like building the tool. But from like my viewpoint, like I don't want to think about the tool. It's already hard enough again to like create the thing, that like I just want to use a tool that like allows me to do it and like go on with my life. That's a reality for me. So
this is just reminding me of when I learned that Cross by Justice was produced in GarageBand.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, exactly. Like it does, like, yes, there's a point where you hit limits with this, but like ScreenFlow's been fine. And like I have Premiere on my computer, and like I'll eventually use it one day, but like, nah.
Jacob said my philosophy, or Jacob mentioned that my philosophy on tools is pretty much the same. It's similar. I'd say same end, different start and middle, where I pick my tools based on replaceability to an extent. Like I need to know that buying into this thing isn't going to ruin my life and kill me in the future. Like I've had to port enough Ember.js code bases to be very strict about what I adopt at this point in my life. Right. I feel like the creator tool bar is kind of the floor right now, and it's really sad. Like the video editors are okay. Everything else in the video space, especially live video, is broken, proprietary, and trash. And it's really sad and frustrating, because I come from audio. Like in the audio world, you ask an audio engineer about their favorite tools, they'll give you a passionate rant about how great Pro Tools is, or Ableton, or FL, or whatever their software of choice is. Do the same in video, especially for live, and they're just going to complain because everything's broken. There's no love in the space, and I want to fix that. And this is a great conversation for me, because your stance doesn't seem rooted in you feel this way because the tools are bad, so much as you feel this way because the job is hard and you don't want to think about the tools, you want to think about the work. Right. It's our belief that if the tools are good enough, people will love them the same way they love React, but there will still be a tier of creator, the same way there is a tier of engineer, that is one of the most productive people in the world that still happens to use jQuery. And there will always be those people, and you're the 2022 jQuery user right now, and that feels weird.
Right. You're totally right. But if he's making, stacks of cash with his app, like,
not only that, but the lunatic React developers like myself that spend all their time building these tools look up to you and the quality of content you're producing with ScreenFlow. And that's the crazy thing here is, as much as I care about making better tools, you're out here proving it doesn't fucking matter. So thanks a lot.
Right. I think a few caveats here. ScreenFlow is like the last thing in like the tool chain, right? So like I essentially hand code all of our animation, most of our animation-y stuff with like Framer Motion. So that does a lot of heavy lifting. And then from there, like screen record and then just paste into ScreenFlow. So yeah, ScreenFlow definitely like, but again, that's if that's my workflow, ScreenFlow is, I just need essentially a timeline, right? And like, I could probably use like QuickTime to do this, right? That doesn't need to be super sophisticated. Eventually, like I'll probably hit a limit where I need something a little bit better, especially as like we get to the point where it's like, okay, I need to now collaborate with people who are also trying to like on a team, right? Like I can't expect to hire someone to do, animations or to do like producing for us who's going to use ScreenFlow, right? Like that's the reality. And so that's when I'll start hitting my limits. But until then, like, yeah, I'm just going to send it with ScreenFlow and hope for the best.
Yeah, this is interesting in the sense that like you are in a lot of ways doing what we want, where ScreenFlow isn't built for people to make full content the way you are with it. Certainly not where you're like making animations in code and recording those in too. That's a different level in a lot of ways. And I'm trying to remember how to put this. It's exciting in the sense that nobody expected React to be used to build game engines. And that's what we're seeing with Ping too. Like, as potentially disappointing as it is that a creator that a lot of us here look up to is using the simplest possible tools, is also inspiring in the sense that if that tool can get you that far, what can people do with what we built? Turns out Star Trek Live.
Right. And I think the reality of it was like, going back to what I mentioned earlier, like I was kind of sick of watching developers on YouTube get like super popular, and then me being like, oh, like I feel like I could do this, right? Or like almost like judging their content. Because then I was just in like a super hypocritical spot where it's like, well, I'm not doing this, so like maybe I can't do this, right? And that's why like really the big focus this year was like, okay, can we make content people enjoy on YouTube? It's clear we could do course content, but YouTube is very much a different animal. And so part of it was like, okay, I have all of these, like this skill set for creating course content. ScreenFlow works fine for that because I'm mostly just like screen recording my screen as I like, have code in like an app, like very basic stuff. So it was rooted more of like, okay, how do I take this same skill set to create stuff for YouTube, which is a little bit different. And so then like I was so focused on, again, that question of like, how do I make course content? How do I take this like course content brain I have and make really good YouTube content? At no point did I think about like, okay, should I change the tool that I'm using to do that? I probably should have, but here we are. It worked out.
So this is more like how Node happened. I'm already using JavaScript. What if I use it here too?
Like might as well. Like if I'm worried about like, I need to run this on the server, right? Like, oh, I already know JavaScript, so might as well figure it out, right? Like, yeah, totally. It worked.
Yeah. And there's a point where it won't, but that's not what we're thinking about. We're busy. Right. And I have a lot of respect for that. Yeah, this has been really helpful for me. I'm not sure how, I hope chat's enjoying this too, but I've learned a ton from this already. This has been really interesting. One thing we haven't talked about too much is community and how like dev communities, content communities, and things between these like overlap. I'm really curious what your thoughts are on like our role as content creators in building communities and what the overlap is between that and like a developer community.
Yeah, this is a hard one for me because like I suck at communities, to be completely honest. And I don't know. So it's like, I feel weird like giving community advice because I'm like terrible at it. Right. And again, like maybe this is the theme here where I do hang out in lunch dev. Also, hey, AJ, thanks for the love. I appreciate you too. To me, and there's so much going on here, Theo. So let me try to like, express this in a way that makes sense. In my life, here's what I care about. Obviously, my family. I have a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 3-week-old. So like I'm very busy there. I care about my employees as well as their family, and obviously like my business stuff. And then I care about making the best developer education content that I can. And so anything that isn't one of those 3 things, my health is in there as well. So like working out and whatnot. Anything that isn't one of those 4 things is really hard to focus on because those 4 things are so much. There's a better word than much for that, but like it's a lot, right? And so when it comes to communities, it's like, this is when I struggle because to have a vibrant community, as you know, like it takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of like forethought and engagement and like all of those things. And I don't have the capacity to do all of those things as well as the other 4 things that I'm doing. And so that's when I struggle, because it's like, well, and as we're seeing with YouTube, like there's this little like ui.dev YouTube community growing kind of. And like I've spoken with Dom. I don't know. Do you know Dom at Netlify?
Oh yeah. Dom's great.
Yeah, Dom is amazing. I don't know if he's been on the show, but if he hasn't, he's
I should bring him on the show. We've had a few chats about Ping, and obviously we talk with Jason a bunch too. I definitely need to get him on the show.
Yeah, Demetrius, he would be a blast, because he's so fun. Every time I speak to him, I feel like I'm just like, on speed or something, because he's always hyped. I speak with him and he's like, hey, you have this like huge like top of funnel thing, and like you need to like capture those people and like have a community and like blah blah blah. And I'm just like, Dom, that sounds so exhausting. Like, so I don't have an answer. That's my long way of saying I have no idea what the hell I'm doing when it comes to community. But one day maybe I'll figure that out. Until then, like, we'll see if something happens organically. I don't know. That's the truth.
Really interesting. So, yeah,
like, what would you do? There is the ui.dev community, and we're probably going to shut it down because it's just like I can't put the time and love into it that I want to. And so our community is more going to be focused on like courses, which is something we do spend a lot of time thinking about and like nurturing, rather than just this like generic developer community. Theo, if you're in my position, is that stupid?
If I was in your position, yes.
You can be blunt. Okay.
Yeah. If I was in your position, yes, but you're in your position, and I think you're different than me in this way. I think that a lot of me is my personality, and the like I get to not put in as much effort because people are to an extent here for me and my way of describing things. Like there's a lot of people in chat that don't care about this topic, but like to hear us talk about things and are as much here for me as anything. It's actually something I noticed that's really different between Twitch and YouTube. Even like when I'm live at the same time on both, on Twitch, it feels like the average person is here for me. And on YouTube, it feels like they're here for the specific thing we're talking about. It's a difference on so many layers. It's how the recommendation system works. It's how the community around those things are. But for me, a lot of the content is me, and being there helps a lot with the engagement.
That makes sense. Maybe because like I've never really gotten into like I'm obviously very aware of Twitch, and I could name like your popular streamer. But even then, like I was never like I'm not involved in these like Twitch communities. These like for mostly I'm mostly off of Discord. Like so maybe it's like a cultural thing for me. Where you're obviously the opposite, right?
I live on these places. I hired half the team off like random Discord servers.
Right, which I love and completely respect. I think we just live very different lives, to be honest. Like I don't even go to like dev conferences anymore, despite COVID. Like, because I would kind of just hang out with my like family or like create stuff, right? I don't know. Maybe that's going to come back to bite me. And obviously there is this like organic community that's kind of forming, and I'm not doing anything with it. But yeah, I don't know. It's a good question, but it's a really hard one for me to answer.
Yeah, I want to stay in touch on this one and keep an eye on it. I don't have an immediate recommendation. It's like people are there for the content itself with you so hard that you've like taken yourself out of the content to an extent, and it hasn't really affected things much. And that's huge in so many ways that like I've immediately noticed videos that don't have me in the thumbnail just don't do as well, period, like instantly. And that's the case on a lot of channels. Like I have heard Linus Tech, for example, talk about this a whole bunch. Like even the videos he wasn't in, they'd put him in the thumbnail because it helped with the like video engagement and getting people to click the thumbnails. And a lot of content and community is that like personal level with the engagement. And my concern would be there's a cap in the number of people who want to watch content about React and JavaScript. And the next step wouldn't be get more people into it. Or you basically be relying on the reach of React and the things you talk about for the reach of your content. And I know we were talking about this earlier, this idea that you kind of have to expand the things you talk about to places that you're less familiar. The alternative would be make the content more centered around you, so people who in the audience aren't familiar with the things you're talking about will still come and listen. Like a decent chunk of my audience is backend engineers that I stole from Primeagen. We don't talk about backend stuff much at all, but they're here because of how I talk about it, and they're getting more interested in that as a result. You get people interested in things that they don't care about via the person, not the thing. And I'm curious what it's going to look like if you hit a wall there or not.
Right. So I used to have everything under TylerMcGinnis.com. Were you following me in those days?
I was not.
So what's funny is because like, yeah, I pivoted away from TylerMcGinnis.com to ui.dev because like I didn't love me being the center point, because I felt like we would naturally hit a wall at some point, right? Like it doesn't feel like a real business if it's TylerMcGinnis.com. It feels like a real business if it's ui.dev. And so, and part of even like having my face not be in the video, it's all fairly deliberate as a way to like, if we can figure out a way, like if we can figure out our voice, then it'll be easier to reproduce that with other content creators. It'll be literally my voice, but like, I don't necessarily need to write the script, right? Verdict is still out if that was a good idea or not. You've seen the opposites of that in like a Kent C. Dodds, right? Who's like this brilliant, he's essentially a brand now. If you go to any conference, everybody just wants to take pictures with him, which is great. He's an awesome guy.
I think closer to you would be more like a Ben Awad went the other way.
Yes, Ben did go the other way. Also love Ben. But yeah, it's like I'm not necessarily super interested in being the face of the thing, despite maybe what would probably be like normally assumed. I don't know. So maybe that's it. I don't know. I feel like this is a therapy session, Theo. This is great.
This happens so often. I love these, especially when it's about like the meta things around content or around like software. I actually find that these convos get some of the best response, where people like, especially those who are here live, they care a lot about like how this is made, even more so than the content itself. Otherwise, they just watch the chopped video on YouTube later. And right. I know everyone here is appreciating this a ton. I will say on this, almost all of the top 100 YouTube channels are a person's name or have a person's name in them. A lot of the biggest brands in various spaces, like I look at Linus Tech Tips a lot. I think it's such a good example of how you scale a person into a company as a content creator, where right. Linus Tech was Linus in every video. He brought in his friends to help like manage the team, manage the content pipe, like do brand deals, edit things. Eventually brought on a guest that, or like one of those people, Luke, who became a hit as well. They would do a lot of content together, slowly let him start doing videos with just him in them, making sure he was advising and building right. that out. Eventually let him start a separate company with Floatplane underneath Linus Tech. Now they have like 7, I think, channels and over 30 people, and they're starting up a startup lab within Linus Tech Tips to build new like micro companies for both content and tech within the Linus brand. It's still all LTT. It's abbreviated now to LTT, but it is right. like Linus's face, and most of their money comes from merch sales with like underwear with his face on them and shit. But right. that helped so much, where the reach of a person will always be bigger than the reach of anything you can talk about. Like every topic has a limit to how far it can go. And my fear with your channel would be, since the content quality level is so absurdly high, you're going to get all of the people who are interested in that and none of the people who aren't. And as a result, you will hit a cap where people who aren't like people who aren't into programming should be watching your videos. And I don't think you get there without being in your videos.
Right. That's fair. We actually have a lot of comments that's like, hey, I'm a game developer. I don't even know what React is, but I really enjoyed this video, you know? So, yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. Regardless, it's an interesting, the counterpoint and the example I always use is like, to me, as of today, my favorite YouTube creator in the tech space is Fireship. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff.
We have like, I don't want to say beef. He's a good dude, but like all the stuff about Maroc and the like Faker.js stuff, that was really messy.
Right. Yes, I completely agree. besides that, obviously that's a big besides. He to me has done very well with this, like, I'm a kind of a faceless thing, right? And so we'll see what happens, and like, it is hard. You're completely right. And like, for example, like this React video we just put out yesterday, 2 days ago, took me an entire month to make. And so it's like, from a business perspective, that's not really sustainable either, right? So there's a lot to figure out. David East in the chat is trolling us, and that's fine. Hello, David. I love you. Anyway.
Yeah, I feel like there's a spectrum here where one side is Ben Awad and the other is Fireship. And you're almost like a little past Fireship in terms of like the faceless nature of the channel. But
Right.
you have enough personality, and like you even said yourself, like one of your like close friends and coworkers said that listening to me sounds like listening to you. People aren't here for the things we're talking about. They're here for me. I think that you could be a multiplier on the quality of your content and on the reach as a result.
That's fair. That's a fair analysis. And you're probably right. Let's chat in 6 months and we'll see where we're at. How about that?
That works for me.
Yeah, because really, like, for the business, like, as you noticed, 2022 is like, okay, what would happen if we focused on YouTube? And so far it's going fairly well. But will we ever hit that, like, hey, you should be more of a personality rather than like a faceless voice? Probably. But I would like to see where the limits of that are, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm curious too. And I absolutely could be wrong about all of this. I see a trend at a level that's way outside of our space, and every space can be very different. Like, a lot of developers are used to reading docs that have no personality at all. And this is, I don't know, there needs to be the equivalent of like a deep focused technical doc and like the history aspect to an extent. Like, you're making documentaries as much as you're making like personality driven content. Your stuff's going to last a lot longer than mine does, period. What I'm curious about is, does the reach get limited by that as a result? And from my suspicions, from what I've seen, immediate reach and like short, medium term reach and growth as a result is limited by not being a person in the content and having like a person within your brand. Something we're even thinking a lot about at Ping, where we can make a Ping YouTube channel that is all about how to stream and set up all this stuff, but we are so scared of it looking like a fellow kids thing, like just another brand making a weird YouTube channel. Right. And why wouldn't I just put it on my channel? I'm making half the content anyways. Like, it's me. Should be there.
Do you subscribe, not calling you out, do you subscribe to Bytes? Just 'cause I see it in the...
Yes, I do.
Okay. That's also funny because like that has so much personality, right? And yeah, maybe I struggle. Maybe this is like a thing we struggle with. It's like we're trying to bring the Bytes personality to essentially the rest of the company. Aggressive, yes. And that's kind of hard, based on the fact that developer stuff by definition is like dense and boring, right? It would be a lot easier to have that personality if this was like if I was a face rather than just like a voiceless thing.
Yeah, I don't think we could have done the like Primogen unit test debate without our faces. That wouldn't have been any fun at all.
Right, you're totally right. And maybe it's just we can change topics, but I think we both may be right. It'll be interesting to revisit in 6 months to a year to see where things are at.
Yeah, absolutely. And AJ's making a really good point too around like podcasts. Like, those are a huge and growing thing. I'm very fixated on video and YouTube, and almost everything I say and suggest and think about is going to be based on the numbers on YouTube and Twitch, and that colors my perspective on this stuff a lot. I almost like objectively should be taking the audio from these and putting them on a podcast platform, but I don't know a thing about podcasting and I don't really care. Like, this is where I live. I'm on YouTube.
Yeah, I can respect that. And I think too, that's been a big focus for us is like, it's easy. I mean, we can dive into this. Like there was a very large shift in how I thought about content, because before it was like, I used before, so like before January 1 of 2022, it was, I think I'm a very good educator and YouTube is this like gross medium, and to be successful on YouTube, you almost have to like degrade the education value of the content to be something more aligned with like Fireship, right? If you were to take my videos before January 1, 2022 and compare to Fireship, they're completely different. They couldn't be more opposite, right? Like his is a 4-minute video. Mine's a 46-minute lecture on like, you know, the history of async JavaScript, like very different. If you look at the page views, he's up a lot, 100x, right? And so it was this shift from like, hey, maybe I should stop being so like pretentious about, you know, this philosophy I have around education and really like try to conform to the medium. And that's really what we did, and it's worked out super well. To your point, like it may make sense to like throw this on a podcast, or it makes sense to say screw that and like just focus on the Twitch and YouTube like live medium, right? And like gear everything towards that. And I do think that, because we talk a lot about that too, being like this like hybrid, you know, developer media company, like, oh, we should take our like Bytes content and make like Twitter threads and blah, blah, blah. And I think all of that is good, but what's better is just like creating native content for the thing that you're on. This is probably a super boring topic for like, you know, 98% of people in the chat and watching this. So I apologize.
I guarantee it is not, because they're all consuming this content. They all care. Fair. Like this is for them, like how the things that they listen to and watch and do enough to be here in the small audience watching this live, they absolutely care some amount. Like that's why we're all here. It's just cool.
I dig it.
You also have a bunch of creators in chat too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. I'd love to see it.
It's a super cool little audience we got. Trying to go through the list to see if there's any other like particular things we should jump on. I am really curious what your like flow looks like from like idea for video to created. We've heard a lot of like the process and post process to actually edit it, but beforehand, like where do your ideas come from? How do you flush them out? Do you talk with people about them ahead of time? Like what's that process like?
It's kind of revolving right now. I'll tell you the old process and I'll tell you what we're trying to do currently. The old process is just being on Twitter and being involved in the ecosystem. You kind of see like trends and whatnot. So the old process was, hey, I have this idea for a video. Like why React Hooks was the very first video that like I kind of told the backstory on, and it got popular. Ironically, it was 2 years ago, and it was like actually more than that. It was 2000. I don't know. It was like 4 years ago now when I did it. And I didn't really grasp like, hey, people like this content, so I should do more of it until like 4 months ago. But the process is basically come up with an idea just of like, and it's mostly an idea I wish existed in the world. From there, it's to consume every single thing I can find about that, right? A good example I use is like, I Googled the thing and then just read a few pages of what comes up on Google. From there, you have a general idea of like what the thing is. For our specific videos, that kind of researchy process involves a lot of like historical, almost like archaeology, right? Where I'm trying to find these like super archaic clips that fit a certain narrative that I have, right? So for like one in the Next.js video and in the async JavaScript video, there's a clip of, I'm blanking out his name, old Google Schmidt, Eric Schmidt, Google CEO, where he talks about jQuery and like the difference between pre and post jQuery era, right? So it's like, it's finding these clips that align with the narrative. It's then like sitting down for a few weeks and writing a script and weaving in these, like these clips that you find. And then from there, it is basically like recording that, putting that on ScreenFlow, and then essentially just filling in like all of the clips with like visuals. So it's kind of boring. Again, it's like, it's very pragmatic, right? Like that's for those in the chat, I have Ben Adam, who's works with me, he sent one of Theo's, I forget which hot take it was that you had. We're big fans of Theo in the chat or in our Slack. And I need to pull this up because it was very beautifully worded, but this is kind of like the takeaway if you've had like how I think about content. Ben said about Theo and about like his relationship to me and how we're very similar. It feels like he's talking to me when he listens to Theo. It's because his hot takes are rooted in pragmatism and not idealism. That's how I think about content too. It's like, it's whatever I could do to create the best content and create the best output rather than focus so much. Hi, Ben, you're in the chat. Good to see you. Rather than focus so much on like the tools and the process and all of that. Like to me, like that's not the interesting thing. And I realize again, Theo, like he's working at like a tools company, but to me, like the process and the tools and like, that's just the thing big companies talk about because they need to standardize it. Like we're a team of 4 people and like we need to focus on the output of the content rather than like the process and how we get there. And sure, we can refine that along the way. But I think the minute we start focusing on the process and focusing on like all those little things is when you get ui.dev from 2020 to 2021, where we don't really ship anything. It's mostly just talking about the process, right? It's such a trap. That was a rant. Sorry.
Nope. This is the rants that we're all here for. I love that so much. The process over problems thing is so real, where like as engineers, we love to think about the very deep technical details and solving a problem forever. And that's not how content works. You can't rebuild your content pipe every video. That's just not realistic. It's like rebuilding half your stack every bug, which we do sometimes see. My favorite thing is when somebody says, hey, we've been working on this like app for 5 years. We have this one particular simple problem we're trying to solve. Has anyone run into it? And the response is, oh, have you tried Remix?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like, we got to be realistic about what to adopt and when. And like, if you were starting a new website from scratch, maybe these new solutions make sense, but you have to understand where you're at, your work's at, and what your goal is. And as a creator, your goal isn't to show off your creator workflow. It's to make good content. And I find, especially in live, this is super common, where I know so many people who want to stream, who've spent more money on their setup than me, who have spent way more time preparing it, that even like know OBS better than I do, that have gone live like twice because it's intimidating to do the thing and actually solve the problem. So they'll solve around the problem for as long as they can. And it's really easy for developers to fall in that trap because there's so much you could be doing. There's so many little things you could be tweaking or playing with and not actually solving the problem, or as AJ just said, optimizing for shipping. Like, people like to feel productive, and you can feel productive doing a lot of things that aren't solving the problem.
Right. A quote I say a lot is like, when we get too far into this realm, is like, planning is the best way to like procrastinate, right? Because like it feels good and it feels like you're doing something. At the end of the day, you haven't done anything, right? And yeah, I that's very much like our vibe is ship and like find out, like F around and find out, like let's ship and find out. So
yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I like, especially if you make decisions in a way where the pieces can be replaced. Like, I set up our database probably not the best way. Since Ping started in August, back when we were still around by T3, we have moved from Worker KV to Heroku for all of a few hours, to RDS, where we stayed for a couple months, over to Planet Scale, and Heroku to RDS. Those were both Postgres, but Planet Scale was a MySQL move, and we were able to make all of those switches almost entirely seamless. We actually had our biggest customer live when I moved from RDS to Planet Scale, and I didn't know that, and it was a fully seamless transition. They didn't even notice. So, like, you can make these big, scary changes if the bridges between them and the assembly of your systems is built in a way where any one part's input and output are simple or clear enough to replace the thing in between. So our backend gives us SQL. Prisma converts the SQL to TypeScript. We call those as functions right now in TRPC, which lets us call that function in our client using React Query with the TRPC wrapper. these are all very like clear inputs and outputs on every side. So replacing any one piece isn't that scary. We've replaced our entire like build process. We moved from Vite over to Next 12 when they added the faster build pipes, because I wanted to use their backend stuff as well. We moved over our style system from styled components to Tailwind. We've moved so many of these parts over because the decision we made was wrong. Could we have spent an additional month planning and making the perfect decision the first time? Maybe, but we might have still made the wrong decision and just wasted way more time getting there.
Right. I agree. There was a question in the chat I wanted to get to. Oh no, it may be out of my view now. It was about your opinions on, oh, there it is. The number one tip for a fresh coding bootcamp grad to break into the industry.
Build shit.
So I want it. Yeah, I think that there's two things to it. That's part of it. The other half of it, and I always say this is corny, is like understanding that this is hard for everybody. I think what happens is like you ask a lot of senior developers these questions, and you have to understand when we got our first job, it was fairly easy to get a job because there weren't developers, and if you knew how to code, like it wasn't terribly difficult, right? Regardless of if you had a CS degree or not. Nowadays, there's about 1 billion front-end like junior developers. They're all trying to get the same 10 jobs, and it's incredibly difficult. So I would say, like, one, understand that it's that way for everybody. Two, is like understanding that it's okay to take a long time to get your first job. Like when you go through a boot camp, you have 3 months of like, oh, look how much I learned. And then from there, there's one of two paths. There's like, I learned nothing else for 6 months, and now I'm 9 months removed from having a job, and I'm kind of screwed because like I need to get income. Or there's, I continue to learn as I like am doing job search stuff. And now I've been learning for 9 months, and now I have much more skills, a better portfolio, all of those things, right? So I think the biggest advice is, one, it's going to be very hard. Two, don't stop learning, like continue to build stuff, continue to grow. And eventually, like you'll catch a break. I don't know if that'll be like, I've seen it happen in a few months for people. I've seen it happen in a few years, but eventually that break always comes if you continue to put in the time to like get better. It's just like, I've never seen someone go through a boot camp, stop learning after 3 months. I've never seen that person. I've never seen it work out for that person, though there's a lot of them.
That's a very good way of putting it. And I definitely am not considerate enough of that when I give my advice of build and they will come to an extent. Right. I definitely fall on that too much, largely because like I am the employer that will see it and find it. Like the people who hang out in this chat, and like there's a couple people in the community who just like link me the stuff they're working on and like have a specific bug they're really struggling with and like can't find the right way to Google, and they'll hit me up with a super thoughtful like, hey, I'm using these things you recommended to build this thing. It's working really well, except I have this one problem. Are you down to help a bit? And like 3 days later, they send me a link to an article they wrote about how all the tech works because they were so frustrated it didn't exist. They went and made that exist. If I was hiring right now, I would hire him right now. But like, there's a lot of those people in the community, and I probably talk too much to them because our community's more than average, only useful if you have a lot of drive and care too much. Like the topic matter we talk on, the pragmatism we talk with isn't very entertaining for someone who's just trying to get their first job. Like this is a channel and a stream for people who care a little too much. And as such, I definitely like cater my stance towards them.
Yes. Yeah. But I think realizing that's why I cringe whenever anyone like you see like, you see these threads on Twitter. It's like, oh, like, you know, work hard. It's like these people are working hard. I can promise you that. Like, yeah. And so just throwing in the like, it's hard for everybody. The biggest thing is like, can you continue to like hit your head against the wall for however long it takes? Like that's usually when you'll eventually get success. Yeah. But then that's the best advice I can give.
Shout out Danny Thompson. I'll share his link in chat quick. Him and I couldn't really agree much less on a lot of these things, but he is so much better than I am for getting through that first like hard part of nailing that first job, because he's all about like little things like looking into the specific weird old tech that are hiring in your area. So you can go get like a Java 6 role just to get into like your first gig.
Totally.
He has the best pro tips for getting that first gig. I am for everything from that point forward, or if you're down to just not have a job for a year and really love the first job you get, that's like where we differ. I think he's the right thing to do if you're here for a career. I'm a fun alternative if you're cool with wasting a bunch of money and time.
Right. And I think AJ in the chat is a great example too. He said, was self-taught for a few years, went to a boot camp, eventually got a job, but he did a lot of like writing about Redwood.js. That's an interesting one because I think a lot of, and I could speak on this topic for hours too, is like the developer content space is really interesting right now. And when I say interesting, I mean 99% of it's garbage, and there's like 1% of it that's good. And the reason for that, and that was a hot take, I hope I don't get in trouble for that, but like the reason for that is because like you have all these boot camps saying, hey, like create content as a way to like stand out. Well, when everybody does that, like you just have this like all of this terrible content, right? And I think that's why like our YouTube channel has been so successful lately, because like it's so different than everything else that's out there, because most of it just isn't good, and it's not by people who like, one, are actual developers, and two, like appreciate the output as much as we do. But to AJ's point, I realize I'm contradicting myself here. That's really interesting because he wasn't writing about like, you know, how to invoke a function, right? He's writing about Redwood, which is like a fairly advanced thing. And so like, that may be an interesting idea, is like, don't write about React because there's a billion beginners writing about React. Maybe not even write about Svelte, like find something like write about like Solid.js or like something to where like, where a hiring person would say, oh, like a beginner wouldn't necessarily be writing about, you know, Solid.js, right? They'd be writing about like the difference between map and filter in JavaScript, right?
Write an article about how these things interop. I think that's one of the like easy ones to fall into.
100%. Yeah. And so it's like, I think creating Marco, Quick are great examples. Yes. Like, if I saw someone writing about Quick, I'd be like, oh, this person knows what they're doing, because, or if they didn't, why in the world would they be writing about Cloudflare workers, Quick, like Marco.js, like all of these things, right? So yeah, I think that's a really interesting strategy as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I think that the cost with those directions is those things are going to have way less reach. Like if you write an article about about Quick, like there's less than 10 posts, and those together have less than 100 views. Like as cool as it is, that's not going to get a lot of reach. What you can get reach with is like the combination of new and old things, or like how to use Prisma with Remix is an article that anybody here in chat could easily have written in 10 minutes and had a lot of viral credit that would have been huge. And I think those are a better opportunity. Don't write about one thing, write about the space between two.
I think you're right. I think I also disagree with you. 2 points. One, that doesn't like reach isn't really what they're optimizing for here, right? Like they're not trying to build like SEO to their blog. They're trying to get a job. So I think if that's purely the case, that doesn't matter. 2, and it takes a little bit of luck. Like I was back in 2014, like creating some of the earliest React content, and that worked out very well for me, even though back then the audience for it wasn't really huge. So obviously, like, yeah, if I choose a generational technology I write about early, like I get lucky there. But those like writing early worked out fairly fine for me. But to your point, interrupting technologies, that's not a bad way to go either. So
yeah, that's actually a good point. I wasn't giving enough credit, just because like the more junior people who have shown me the success of like writing an article, for them it's been like Prisma heard about them because this article did well and like got on their desk. But the other side of this blog existing means when you send a cold resume in and they look through it, you look more impressive. That side is as if not more important. So very good point there as well.
Right.
Yeah. One thing you touched on that I think is really important in a lot of places is, especially in the creator world and also in the founder world, is this idea of like how bad you have to feel for a while. It's funny enough, like a YouTuber for YouTubers type, Harris Heller, he does a lot of content about like streaming and making YouTube videos. He did a video called do you have what it takes to be a YouTuber? And the general concept was success on YouTube isn't about how productive you can be at your peak and when you're at your best. It's when you're at your worst, when you hit that floor where you're like skirting burnout, how far can you go when you're there? Because most of your life is going to be there. You're going to be spending a lot of time feeling as bad as you can feel. Is that going to stop you from being productive and getting shit done? If no, you're going to kill it. If yes, do something else.
100% agree. And I love that energy. It's very like Seth Godin vibes. Seth Godin has a few quotes on this, where he talks about like your work is too important for how you feel currently. And so to wait till you're like inspired or till you feel good, it's not necessarily like that's a terrible strategy. There's a tweet I saw the other day. I forget. It was someone everybody would know here. About what was it? It was something along the lines of like, inspiration isn't the thing you start with. It's like the byproduct of work. That's also a really good one. And then one I always remember too related is like, I think it was a Seth Godin quote as well, where he talks about plumbers, and like plumbers don't get like plumber's block, right? Like they're professionals. They show up, they do the job regardless of how they're feeling. And that's really what we try to do with our content too, is like, I may not feel like creating content on a Monday, but it's my job and I'm a professional, so I'm going to do it anyway. Right. And so same energy. And I really agree.
I'm curious, like knowing that you've had a bit of a founder journey yourself, if you feel the same way there, because I feel it even harder there. Obviously, I have the luck of my content isn't my livelihood, so I can take 2 weeks off and it's fine. And I did, funny enough, to go run my company and do our fundraise and all that stuff. So I've definitely felt more I felt this harder there. And I'm curious if you think there's as much overlap between the creator experience and the founder experience here as I do.
Yeah, it's the exact same. And that's what I think people working at these big companies, like I always make fun of my FANG friends because like they just really don't get it, right? They don't get that like as a founder, like it's like the skin in the game. Like if you don't do the thing doesn't get done. Or if someone on the small team doesn't do the thing doesn't get done. And so, yeah, and it's so weird that like, cause I'm a little bit different than you, where it's like the content is kind of the business. And so it makes it like double stressful, where I can't really just go like, I would love to go away for a few months and do like, SEO research or like what A/B testing and like all like the buzzwordy stuff. But like, I just can't do that because like Monday's going to come and I really probably need a YouTube video to go out on Monday. Right. So it really is an interesting balance of, I don't know if you can hear the kids screaming in the background. I'm sorry.
Yeah, not at all.
It's really an interesting balance of running the business, running like being a content creator. And like, I always joke that like, I kind of just created the role that I always wanted to exist and kind of like hired myself into that. Cause it is a really cool role, right? Where it's like, I get to be a founder, which I love. I get to always be researching new technologies, which I love. I get to be creating and writing and doing all these things, which I love. I get to work with a team that I love. Like it is really good, really fun place to be. So.
Yeah, I am jealous in a lot of ways there, where I didn't build the role I wanted so much as I built the things I needed, and I really needed these things to exist. So it was more like a matter of what's it going to take for me to will these things into existence. Like the reality is, if somebody else had built what I wanted to at Ping, I would just go work for them. Maybe be their CTO, maybe not, maybe just be a small engineer at the company, but no one was. I know that because I was at Twitch for almost 5 years. They were never going to build the things creators needed. That was clear. And I wanted to build the things creators needed because I love those creators and I wanted to be one myself. And I come from the art world more than I come from the tech world. I need this shit to work. And that means I had to be a CEO.
Right. And I think the best companies and the best content get produced under those circumstances, right? Where it's like this one crazy person, and I use crazy loosely here, but like that needed this thing to exist. And that's why I joke with like people who are like, oh, how do you like, can you give me any tips for like how to do videos like you? It's like, well, spend a month just eating shit. And like, that's kind of how it is, cause like, and then then ideally you get something that's really good. It just sucks for a month. Like every time I do a video, it's terrible, but it's like, it's learning to embrace that and almost like, to strangely enjoy that like creation process, even though it is like, for the most part, like mostly miserable. Like I can promise you spending an entire month researching React 18, completely miserable. Wasn't a super fun topic. There are funner topics, but like React 18 itself is like a kind of a low level thing, and like and then like weaving a story around that to make it enjoyable to consume. Not the funnest thing in the world, but yeah, it works out.
Well, we just got a cheer from Coding Cat thanking you for all that you do. Thank you for that. But
Appreciate Coding Cat. He's great.
yeah, he's great. I totally agree. This is like, I got a lot from skateboarding here. Like, I came from a professional sports background. I was like really into skiing and skating, and those were going to be like my thing. And then I had an injury that kind of stopped that. So I got really into Minecraft and Java and eventually JavaScript. But yeah, you don't learn to skateboard sitting in class 8 hours a day, hearing about how skateboards work and like reading all up on the inner workings on a skateboard from the 80s. You learn how to skateboard by going in the street and hitting the ground over and over and over again until suddenly you ride away and you didn't even expect to. And then you try to replicate it and you fail to another 200 times. And then you do it once more, not expecting to. And maybe you learn the trick now, maybe you didn't, and you're still going to bail all the fucking time. Like, the best skater in the world will still bail a kickflip. Happens all the time. And that's just the art of the sport. Like, we're not basketball. We're not a person who could stand there and land 100 like 3-point shots in a row. Like, we're throwing around this fragile piece of wood with wheels. That fragile piece of wood with wheels is still a lot more consistent than the YouTube algorithm.
Right. I agree. Yeah, I dig the energy. It's always like, some people hate on it because it's a very like, it can get confused with like hustle culture and all that garbage, but like, it's what's worked for me, so I go with it. So
I think it's learning to love failure and learning from it without like letting it affect your emotions too hard. It's so important to fail in a way that excites you, in a way. Like,
right.
I miss my job being wrong all the time. Now being wrong is rare, big, and has a lot of consequences, rather than being wrong being a thing I did 10 times in an hour trying to debug something. Like, I'm really trying to find like the right ways to be wrong as a CEO where I can still feel like I'm growing from it. And I think that's what's let me accelerate as fast as I can. Even dumb stuff like when I got started coding, I learned Git before I wrote my first line of code because I used it to manage my servers. I was really deep in Git, SSH, and GNU Screen before I ever wrote a line of code. And because of that, I've never in my life worried about deleting code accidentally because it's always in the history. And I think those little things help me learn way faster because I never had the same fear of failure that the average dev clearly has.
Right. Yeah. I like that. I like that attitude. So, anti-fragility, as AJ says.
That's an interesting way of putting it. Yeah. This is also my whole like building safety nets thing. I think a lot of that's mental, like building your own safety net, like in your head in a way where if this video fails, that's fine. Like, I don't need this to succeed. Obviously, I want this to succeed. I'm going to do everything I can to make it succeed. But when I hit the safety net, I learned something in the process. I can see where I misstepped. I can learn from this process. And building in a way where you can't learn from the failure and putting yourself so into the thing that failing doesn't make progress is really painful and really common. Like, so many creators are like, this is going to be the video. I'm going to put everything into this. And then when it flops, they never post another thing. And you can't do that.
Yeah, it's a hard balance of like caring about the output so much, but also not caring about their like the performance of the output. It's so strange because naturally you want to do the opposite, right? Where it's like the success of the thing is based on the performance of the thing. I use performance here in like the YouTube sense. When in reality, like if that's the game you're playing, then like that's a really hard game and good luck because eventually you're going to be sad. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah. YouTube's a strange beast, and I have a channel because Dan Abramov came on my show, and I still have a channel because Prime did an interview with me. Like, this is me hanging out, and it's really cool seeing from the other side how much thought goes in and how well that works yet at the same time, how we are all just kind of winging it. Like, just like we are in the software world, like, yeah, we might be senior, we might have seen things break in more ways, but that doesn't mean that we are any. Okay, we're a little better at getting it right the first time, but not a lot, and we still fail just as much. It's not as visible as you might think, but for every code stream I do where the code goes well, I have 3 where I look like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's like the it's like the beauty of it, right? If it was always successful, it'd be kind of boring. It'd be nice and convenient, but it would be boring. So I don't know.
Totally agree. What are some of the most unexpected challenges of doing this creator founder thing full time?
That's a great question. Just the consistency of it, right? Like that's once you kind of figure out the thing, then from there it's kind of just rinse and repeat, right? And that's what's so hard about it is like, I don't know if it's discipline or what, but like being able to wake up and consistently do the little things right, and just relying on like that to take care of everything else, like to be the product and like to take care of all the other stuff, right? And so I think that's been the biggest thing is just really, and I compare it a lot to like, running or cycling or any sort of like endurance sport, where it's like the key there isn't necessarily to like go and do these monster workouts as much as it is just consistently doing Anthony, the Mormon missionary is a great way to put it. As much as it is just doing the consistent thing, the small things consistently, right? The best runners are the ones who consistently show up. They don't have amazing workouts every day because they would get injured. They just have good workouts every day. And it's the same idea, right? Where it's, can you show up consistently every day, do the little things right for years? And I think the best creators are the ones who do that, and kind of embrace that for what it is, rather than like, okay, I'm going to spend 3 months on a video and then based on the success of that video, then like define my next action, right? Like that's just not how it works. And so that's the biggest thing. Same with the business, right? Where it's like, can we consistently make a bunch of really small but good decisions that will then like compound to something bigger? So
Yeah, absolutely. You can change the word creator and founder at any point throughout this entire conversation. It's the exact same, which is still so cool and weird to me. And that's been an awesome learning for me as I like go through the whole Y Combinator founder journey and see that it's the exact same on both sides in so many ways, and giving like the same tax advice to a new content creator that I do to like a like already founded company. And what's interesting here is this idea of the endurance and it's not a sprint, it's a really, really long marathon. There's a slide that Y Combinator shows us a lot, which is why YC companies fail. Because a lot of them do. I think it's like over 60% end up failing. And the reason for over 95% of them is that the founders gave up and got disenfranchised. The other 5% is whatever else, like a competing company raised more money and squeezed you out of the market, or you got screwed by some patent rules or something. But 95% of the failures of people starting companies are just the people who gave up. It's not people who failed, it's people who didn't keep going.
Yeah, that kind of ties into, there's a question in the chat. How do you avoid getting too comfortable to the point where you don't try new things? What's funny is like, and this is maybe bad for my mental health. My livelihood is essentially dependent on me not doing that. Right. So I've essentially like put myself in a position where my incentives are, whether it's with like the newsletter or the YouTube channel, my incentives are to kind of always be learning new things, to always be like experimenting and playing and learning. And so getting comfortable isn't necessarily an option because like I have a mortgage to pay, right? And again, don't know if that's great for my mental health, but that's the reality. And I don't, that's not advice to like other people who aren't in my situation. That's just like the reality of what I find myself, where I find myself is I kind of have to do those things. And the good news is it is what I enjoy and I do love doing it. But yeah.
I think a lot of it is also like what you're doing here, just hanging out a place like this. You're going to learn new things. You're going to challenge yourself in a lot of ways. It's by doing what you're doing here, you are staying on top of it, and you're much further away from like stagnation and comfort mindset than the average engineer who just goes in, does their work and leaves. Like, don't worry too much about it. Just keep doing shit, keep talking about the shit you want to do, and you'll be surprised what comes from it.
Right. And like, if you're watching this right now, like, I'm not worried for you because you're weird and normal engineers aren't doing this kind of thing where they're like, you know, whatever time it is, it's 5:45 here. Like, they're watching Netflix or like, you know, doing something else, which is completely fine. But to the question, like, everyone in this chat is kind of weird. And that's a good thing related to that topic of like, hey, I'm worried about getting too comfortable with what I'm doing. Like, you're doing fine if you're here at 7:44 PM, right? Like,
yeah, I make this point a lot, like, especially for junior devs that are trying to like level themselves and figure out how much they're growing, where they're at in their career, stuff like that. Finding communities like this on Twitter, Discord, wherever, just to have the developers you might not have around you otherwise. Like, this is kind of the advantage of a boot camp or going to university, is suddenly you're surrounded with a bunch of people at roughly your level that you can use to like ground yourself, compare, and feel stupid, but also feel smart. And it's important to be in a place where you can feel both. And to an extent, online, you're going to mostly feel the stupid for a while, but at least you have the opportunity for that feedback. And that's something that didn't exist when I was younger. And it's a big part of why I felt like I had to go to university. That's where you go to talk to programmers. And now there's a lot of cooler places. And I'm suddenly going to like talk with the people whose newsletters I've read for years. But that's how quickly things escalate once you're surrounded with the right people.
totally. With that, I gotta go.
Totally fine. This was a phenomenal show. Thank you so much for stopping by,
man. I'd love to do it. I have huge respect. Obviously, you know, I've told you this, Theo, for you, for the company you're building. Everybody in the chat, thanks for all the love. I appreciate you all. And I will see you, I don't know where, because we don't have a community. Maybe I'll see you on Twitter. I don't know.
Follow him on YouTube at the very least if you're not already. I have his Twitter there too, all in chat. I'll share these on YouTube quick as well, so everybody there has it. Thank you again so much for stopping by. I'll keep the show live a little bit after, so you can run off. Cool. Thank you so much, man. Keep it real. Peace. Let's switch to self. How was that, guys? That was one of my favorite shows I've done so far. Tyler's great. He's one of the hardest working creators in the space, and I'm so pumped that we got to like actually share his story and the crazy stuff that he does, like especially since he doesn't put his face on his content. It's really nice to be able to do that for him. And yeah, really excited for this VOD to go up. Any other thoughts or questions before I wrap it up? I should probably go find some food. I have an event coming up kind of soon. We're with Tyler for 10 years. That's awesome. I am genuinely jealous. He's a dope person. Yeah, chat was great too. Thank y'all so much for stopping by, especially after the chaos with the crash. I did not think that this was going to hold viewership at all, and it was really cool to see that it did. So thanks, y'all. I immensely appreciate it. Yeah, the VOD will be up. It might be a little chopped because of the outage mid-show. I am going to probably take the time to stitch together an edit because I really liked this one and I want to make sure it's like accessible. Oh, I can show chat again. That's cool. Look at that. Y'all are here. Sorry, I haven't had chat on as much lately. I have had guests and where I put it would cover them. The first 30 minutes is VODed? Oh no. That's going to be annoying to stitch. I'll deal with that later. Early apologies to my like pseudo editors who have been helping keep the channel clean. That's going to be painful. Yeah, I'll probably just delist the VODs and go make an edit quick. Yeah. Hilariously enough, oh boy, I'm scared of what's going to happen. Oh, you've been writing the timestamps live. Woo! They'll still matter. That'll make my life a lot easier when I actually edit it. Worst case, I can shift it and like use the relative times. they'll still matter. They'll still matter a lot. Thank you, man. Y'all are the best. I have the coolest community. Thank you guys. And like, especially since this isn't like traditional programming content, it's so cool y'all still show up. Like, yeah. Chris, I just saw you asked if there's a way to see the commands. Commands. Woo. I made things that work, kind of. Yay. Let's go find someone to raid quick. I don't have an easy way to... I could kind of easily window capture this. Let me window capture. New tab. Can I untransform this? Transform. Reset. Make it smaller, make it fit. Cool. Good enough. Let's see who else is live in the... Oh no, it's going to be loud. It's not what I was trying to hit. Who else is live in the software dev world? God, it is so hard to get to a category. I don't know how Twitch works anymore. I should know this. I'm just going to go to /Theo. And from here, go to the category. Mute myself so I don't hear myself. Who's live? Ooh, TJ's live. That could be fun. You want to go hang out with TJ? The VOD will be great. Or the VOD will be up on YouTube soon. I'm not going to touch Twitch, so it'll be there too if you just want to watch it there. I'll have a better VOD up soon. I don't care if you guys see my dashboard. I'm not hiding anything in here. Let's raid TJ. TJ_DV. Raid is started. See y'all there. Thanks for stopping by. See you next week. Peace, y'all. Good show.